engaging executives in change. I think that many times our executives are very, very busy. They feel very pulled in many, many directions, of course, and they are. They have a big responsibility to lead their organizations. But we also know that it's very important for us to have leaders and sponsors, what we call sponsors in our organization, to have leaders and sponsors that are really in charge of things, that are at that top leadership level, and yet are still able to engage in leading change for change initiatives. And so this is a really important topic, and I find that it's surprising to me, but not, well, I shouldn't say it's surprising. It's frustrating and surprising to me that we haven't made as much headway over the past few years as I think we should have in explaining to leaders and explaining to our executive team what they need to do to be able to be effective and be active and visible in leading change. The PMI, Pulse of the Profession, in 2014, in 2018, in 2022, every time it's published, we see that the number one success factor for successful change is active and visible leadership, sponsorship of the change. This is huge. We need our sponsors who are leaders in the organization, who are executives in the organization, to be able to show up and be active and visible, and also to be able to share with everybody in the organization why this change is important. I think that's the number one job of a sponsor or leader for change, is to really get everybody on the same page in terms of vision. I think it's very difficult to get everyone on the same page in terms of vision. Sometimes we have competing visions, we have competing priorities, but that role of the executive leader, of the sponsor, of the leader of the change, is to really describe the vision in a way that's realistic for people, in a way that they can achieve, that's relevant to them, that they can relate to and understand. And so when we have our sponsors and our leaders speak to our teams, speak to our stakeholders, speak to our customers in a relevant, relatable vision, relevant, relatable way, to share what this change will be like at the end, in the future state when we get there, that's a big, big piece. So I wanted to talk with you about this today because I'm really curious. For those of you who are here, please feel free to put in the chat your top leader on your most recent change. What did your top leader do that was helpful to the change effort? Go ahead and type it in the chat, and I'll be able to relay the comments that are in the chat. What has your top leader in the most recent change you were involved in, what did they do that was helpful to the change? Yes, I do know that I had somebody say they did a kickoff. That's a big, big deal. Having your leader show up for, be prepared for, and do a great job of sharing the vision of the change at the kickoff is essential. When we know that we have leaders who can describe in detail the future state, that's really, really helpful. So kickoffs are a big deal in terms of our leaders. Feel free to add more pieces to the chat as we go along and as we talk through the interesting pieces of leadership. So some leaders don't recognize this as an important role for them. Some leaders feel like they already have their divisions, they are organizing their work teams, and they are focusing on ensuring that they meet their goals and targets for the year. And that's terrific. That's exceptional. We want that. However, we have to convince them in our conversation that we need them to be successful with the change, and they need to be successful with the change as well. So I have had struggles with this in the past, and I don't know if you've ever struggled with having this situation where you can't quite get your leader on board. And actually, I had a problem where I couldn't even get to my leader. I talked to my leader and I explained to her that I was working on the change and that we needed to meet together once a week. And I proposed an hour once a week to talk about this change. And she just laughed at me. She said, I'm triple booked. I have no way to meet with you once a week. I have no way to meet with you for an hour. And I will see you at the project team meetings. And I was a little taken aback by this, but I went to the project team meetings and I figured I would start communicating with her at these meetings, but she didn't attend. I didn't see her and I didn't see anybody from her team at these project meetings. And this went on for 3 weeks. And I had been thinking to myself the entire 3 weeks, like, boy, she's not really doing what she needs to do to be a great leader of change. And I started to build a defense for myself. I thought, well, I have tried to meet with her, and she said she's too busy. And, if she's too busy to meet with me and she's too busy to know what to do for this change, I guess we're just going to fail and it will be her fault. But the moment I said to myself, it will be her fault, I realized it was my fault. It would be my fault because I knew better. I actually knew that this was going to cause a problem. So instead, I went to her admin and I asked if there was any way I could speak to her for 15 minutes a week, just 15 minutes. I was willing to go 15 minutes every other week, but I just said, is there any way I could do 15 minutes a week with her? And her admin said, well, you're both walking to the same meeting from this building to a building across the town. You're welcome to walk with her. I'll give you that as your meeting time. So the 15-minute walk I had from my building to the building we were having a meeting in with her was my 15 minutes a week. And I was so happy to finally have some time with her. But I figured I needed to do a great job of explaining to her all of the communication and change activities and all of the sort of nuances that were going on in the organization around this change. I was going to have to give it to her very quickly every week in 15 minutes. So that's when I developed the Engaging Leaders Brief. And the Engaging Leaders Brief is something that I teach in my Ready, Set, Change training. And the Engaging Leaders Brief really made a terrific difference in this particular change implementation. Because when she saw this Engaging Leaders Brief, which basically has 3 kind of rectangle bubbles across the top. One is for communication that has to go out this week from the sponsor, from the leader. One is for activities we need the sponsor or leader to show up to every week. And the third bubble is for things that they should keep their eye on. So this is like not a risk register, but this is sort of a heads up register, if you will. Like, hey, I've noticed that, we seem to have a little frustration between 2 different stakeholder groups and they're taking it out on each other, or they're blaming you, more likely. So I recall putting that on the top row of this Engaging Leaders Brief that I was creating for her. And then at the bottom row, I had the same 3 rectangular bubble shapes. And then I had communication for next week, activities for next week, and things to celebrate. Because I knew the leader wouldn't know what to celebrate. She was not going to have time to track milestones, recognize when a sprint had been completed, be happy for somebody's baby being born, or even being able to talk to and reference that user acceptance testing or something had started. So I put that underneath the bubble that said things to keep your eye on. And then I had the communication and the activities. Now, the great thing about this tool was once I did it the first time, it became much simpler each week because I would simply take the row that was at the bottom, which said for next week, and move it up to be this week. So anything that was in the this week row could not be changed. It couldn't be changed unless there was something dramatic, some emergency, like the project had been canceled or something even more dramatic. Um, but everything in the bottom row, which is happening next week, was available for editing or reworking or negotiation and talking about it. So it made it very possible for her to quickly see the 3 bullet points, 2 or 3 bullet points in every single box, and know what to communicate this week, what to be at this week, and things to be aware of, what she was going to be doing next week, what she was going to be communicating next week, and things to celebrate. And when I started using this Engaging Leaders Brief, which as I mentioned, is in the Ready, Set, Change training that starts April 22nd, actually, very soon. Once I used this document with her, she became a fantastic sponsor. She was terrific. She knew where to be, what she needed to do. She was very aware of the project, and she was really quite aware of some of the political important information that she couldn't necessarily have been informed about previously, but since she had seen it developing in her briefings, she was really on top of situations that could have easily gotten out of control. So let me pause and ask you, anybody who's on our LinkedIn Live today, please put in the chat, have you had success in getting some sort of conversation with your leader once a week? You could put yes and give me a thumbs up. You could say no, whatever you've encountered. One of the key pieces for me was to really identify her role for her job as the change leader. She was on the executive team. She was the top leader for her division. And I recognized that she was very busy, but when she put her mind to something, she was fantastic. And I knew that our Engaging Leaders Brief was really effective. When I went to a conference that was about half an hour away from our town, and she was at the conference, and I saw her sitting in the front row of the conference, and I said, "What are you doing here?" She said, "Well, it was on my sheet, so I'm here." And I just thought, wow, she really took this extremely seriously. And the important part for the project was just the fact that she was so involved and so active and so visible that everybody knew this was important to her and she was committed. That goes a long, long way with your employees, with your stakeholders, with your customers. It goes a long way to see the leader very active and visible. And that's why in the Pulse of the Profession, the PMI Pulse of the Profession report that comes out every 4 years, that's why it's so critically important to share that that the leader must be active and visible. So that was a really interesting conversation to help her get on board and to help her become really accessible to people and active and visible in leading this change for them. But many times people don't have like a lot of access to those leaders. In fact, sometimes it's intimidating to even try to connect with them and to even speak to them. And when that occurs, I think it's really important to have a little meeting with ourselves, to have a little self-pep talk, positive self-pep talk, because we're all human and we're all trying our best to help each other and to be productive and to do what's right. Would you agree? If you agree, feel free to put a thumbs up in the chat or yes. You feel free to say yes in the chat. One of the things that I think we forget sometimes is we forget to assume positive intent. We sometimes slip backwards into our lizard brain, if you will, where we feel like everything is a threat to us, and we forget that people generally, I won't say everybody, people generally want to do what's right. Leaders want to do what's right. Executive leaders want to do what's right. And so recognizing that most people have positive intent helps us to overcome any kind of mental games or intimidation we might be feeling. If I know that it's my job to help my leader be really effective in this change, and I assume that they have this positive intent to be very effective in the change as well, it gives me a much stronger confidence platform to step off of, right? When I'm reaching out to that leader, maybe they say, I can't do it right now, or I'm busy. And we take that as rejection and we kind of hide and think, oh, they're busy. They don't have time for me. What am I going to do? Rather, we could say, I know they must be very busy because I'm going to assume positive intent. I'm going to assume that that leader wants to do the right thing, and I'm going to treat that leader as though they want to do the right thing. So when I went and asked for the 15 minutes a week, I knew that her admin wanted to do the right thing. She wanted to be able to help me get on the calendar. And so I didn't find it insulting in any way that I had to have my 15 minutes on our feet. In fact, I was just listening to a new book called Possible by William Ury, and he was the co-author of Getting to Yes, and also authored the book Getting Past No, and now he has written a book called Possible, just came out. And one of the things that he was talking about was this understanding that sometimes we kind of uh, scare ourselves by not assuming positive intent, and we just see everything as a yes or no. So we might see the 15-minute offer as an insult rather than thinking about, wow, this is a great opportunity to go have this time and to be able to walk. In his book, he's talking about the importance of walking while communicating and negotiating about things, about how important human walking is for our brains and for our relationships. And I do have to tell you that the walking from one building to the next, even when it was those cold, blustery Michigan days, was extremely helpful to the relationship I developed with this sponsor, with this leader. It was very helpful to our relationship because we were both cold. We were in the same situation. We were in a hurry, but we still had really important things to talk about. So we want to recognize that whatever we can do, we shouldn't take offense if somebody says, "I can only give you 15 minutes of walking." That's not punishment. That's an opportunity. And I think we have to assume that positive intent and take that opportunity. Another thing that William Ury has been talking about in this book called Possible that I think really applies to leadership. And so I think it would be a terrific book to recommend for all of you who are interested in how to better engage with leaders, is this idea of having always a third option. When our sponsor says, no, I can't do that, we can't assume that this is sort of a yes no opportunity, right? There must be a third thing we can try. There must be another option that we can go to. And he talks quite frequently about going to the balcony, which is going up to our higher self and kind of looking over at the big picture, looking over this imaginary balcony at the big picture of the change. Is the big picture of the change need this leader, or does the big picture of the change need you to engage with this leader so they can lead it very well? So it's important to recognize that sometimes we get caught in the whirlwind, the day-to-day, the sometimes petty feelings that we might have when a leader might not always be receptive to our joining them or encouraging them to be involved in a change that they tell us they don't have time for. And then we can go to the balcony in our minds and we can think about the importance of the leader to this change and the importance of our role in convincing that leader how to interact throughout this change so that they can be active and visible. I like to also do homework on my leader. I like to do a DISC assessment on my leader. And if you haven't had a DISC assessment yourself, I think many people are aware. You can Google DISC assessments. There are multiple vendors and who provide DISC assessments. I work with Wiley on DISC assessments, and I'm a DISC facilitator. So I really understand this assessment and how it can help people to be more effective in the way that they work with others, as well as the way that they work in a project. And so I would look at my leader and determine what DISC style does this leader seem to be, so that I have more information to better be able to communicate with my leader, to be able to engage that leader, to work with them in the way they like to be worked with, right? Some leaders love to have a lot of conversations. Some leaders want everything in writing. Some leaders are, good at taking charge and taking the bull by the horns and moving things forward. And other leaders are more laid back. They like to just kind of go with the flow. But knowing what you're dealing with before you're dealing with it is very helpful also. And then I think if I have to convince a leader, or if I feel like a leader is really struggling, like maybe this is beyond their level of experience. Maybe they're a new leader and this is beyond their level of comfort. They don't feel confident. They don't have the political standing in the organization to be active and visible and get things done. If something like that occurs, sometimes I will pair that leader. I'll partner that leader with another leader in the organization. And when I do that, when I build this partnership between the two leaders, then that newer, less experienced, and maybe less politically positioned leader can rely on the more experienced leader to kind of lead the way and provide their credibility, guide with their credibility, lend a little credibility, if you will. So I think that that's an important piece as well. One of the things that really makes a big difference in our change initiatives or in our projects and the success of our projects, not only is this relationship between the person who is responsible for leading the change management lead, and the sponsor, but also is really understanding the whole process of how that vision of the change is communicated through that leadership team. Because it can't just come from the one leader. It has to be cascaded down throughout all of the leadership teams in that organization. It has to go through managers and supervisors, has to go through foremen sometimes. Sometimes we have change agents who are working from particular units, and they can sponsor or sort of cascade that sponsor message out throughout the organization as well. But the big piece to remember in this is just the fact that this cascading effect and ensuring that the message and the vision of the change is being seen and heard, and that we're communicating about this change all the time, so that when it happens, when this change occurs, it is not a surprise. It is understood. It's been prepared for. People have shifted in their mental acceptance of it. They've changed their mindset. They have actually attended training. They are going through support as they start to prep for the go live period. And then when that change goes live, that leader has to stand up even taller and say, we'll make sure that the pieces that are not going well are resolved for you. And they really stand out and lead the way, so that when we get to that future state of the change, when we say, hey, we've made it to the end of this change, we did it, even though we're still have a few things to change, few things to adopt, we may still have some things to adapt, we may have some software updates ahead of us, that leader can absolutely then proudly say, we did it, and we're celebrating. And that's when that leader earns the celebration, not just from standing up at the first day of the kickoff and saying good luck and then showing up the final day. That's not earned. Earned leadership, earned sponsorship is seeing that change through the entire life cycle of the change, because that's what's important for our stakeholders, for our customers, for our team members and project members, and most importantly, for the organization as a whole. Because we know that change is both individual and organizational, but we cannot do organizational change without individual change. So that leader, that sponsor, that executive being engaged in the change makes all the difference. Makes all the difference. So please, I'd love to hear from you. And I'd love to hear about the stories that you've had with your leaders, good or bad. I really had a revelation when I recognized that it was up to me to make sure my leader was successful. And, you know, one of the things that we accomplish in our Ready, Set, Change training, and our training begins on April 22nd. One of the things that we do is we really help our participants to learn how to engage our leaders through our training so that those leaders can be successful, our change initiative is successful, our change leaders are successful, and everybody's able to adopt the change, to adapt their behavior, and have a successful ongoing relationship with each other and that change going forward. So thank you for joining me for LinkedIn Live this week. I will see you in 2 weeks, and we'll be talking again about leading change. Take care.